Hi, Juliet. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with me today while you're at the Miami Book Fair. Is this your first trip there?
It is.
What do you think so far? I know it's kind of early in the day, but what do you think?
Oh, it seems incredible. There are authors from so many different fields, such top name authors. I'm really happy to be part of it.
And your book is Demon Fish. It's
Yeah.
about sharks. And my first thought when I saw the book was, do sharks get a bad rap? Because, we have the Shark Week and it's always showing this dramatic footage of sharks jumping out of the water and attacking people and all this sort of thing. But the truth is, we really need sharks. So why don't you give us a little insight into um, your inspiration for writing this book?
Sure, really, what you're speaking to is exactly some of the themes that I explore in my book. I became intrigued by sharks when I actually got into the water for the first time, not far from Miami. I went to Bimini in the Bahamas and was working with scientists there, seeing what they were learning about sharks. And I really came to understand that they are a really important part of the ocean and that we need them to maintain the natural balance in the sea. On top of that, I was just so struck by how beautifully designed their bodies were and how they seemed so perfectly adapted for their environment. And so that's really what drew me in. And then along the way, I really came to understand how many different ways our lives are connected to sharks, whether you're talking about a shark caller, a villager in Papua New Guinea who has a faith tradition about sharks, or Mark the Shark Cartiano who operates right off Miami Beach and catches sharks for tourists for a living.
Now, one of the things that struck me in your work is you said how sharks actually regulate the sea. Explain a little bit about that.
So they're one of the sea's top predators, and in that role, they play a crucial part of keeping mid-level predators in check. So, for example, because they're so dominant at the top of the food chain, they keep populations of, say, rays, smaller sharks, other mid-level predators in check, so that they don't overpopulate and, in turn, for example, eat out all the smaller fish on the food chain that, for example, do things like eat the algae off coral reefs to keep them healthy. So, what scientists have learned is that if you look at the places where, for example, shark populations are at their best, those are some of the most vibrant and healthy coral reefs in the world. And if you look at where we've taken out the top predators, for example, along the eastern coast, along the seaboard here in the Atlantic, what you see is a collapse of lower level marine species because they've been eaten, to a large extent by these mid level predators. So they operate kind of in the same way we've seen wolves in Yellowstone who, keep, say, the elk in check, or, the way you think of lions on the African savanna.
What do you say to fishermen that are concerned about sharks in the water and they need to be eliminated to make sure that they can go out and make their living?
Right. Basically, what I'd say to them is that again, they actually have more to gain
Hmm.
by having those sharks around than not. While certainly they sometimes feel that they're in direct competition for fish with sharks, whether you're talking about spiny dogfish in the northeast or maybe dusky sharks in the southeastern Atlantic. In fact, those sharks do more to keep the commercial fish species that we care about around than if they weren't there altogether.
Why do you think the media really highlights and spotlights, the one or two, and I'm not making light of it, but it's not
No.
a lot of shark attacks, but you would think that there's a shark attack, every day. What is our fascination with that?
I think that we're both hardwired to fear sharks because, after all, they are a predator and they can, inadvertently strike humans. And, there's something spectacular about a shark strike in the same way there is a plane crash and things like that. I am, of course, a member of the media and I do recognize that we sometimes tend to sensationalize some of these really terrible accidents. And so what you see is that this is something that people respond to, that when you put up a story about a shark strike, you're going to get a lot of web hits. And as a result, there's kind of this automatic incentive, whether you're talking about a television station or you're talking about a print newspaper or website, to really highlight a shark strike. And it gives people a disproportionate sense that they're out to get us, when in fact, again, on average, roughly 5 people worldwide die each year from a shark strike compared to, say, you know, the 100,000 people who die from a snake bite. You don't see front page snake bite stories all the time.
Right, exactly. What do you think of the tourist industry about having people jump in the little tanks and behind the bars and dropped into the water so that they can see sharks up close and
Right.
personal? What do you think of that?
I think what we're seeing is that there certainly is a rise in ecotourism, and it may be one of the strongest drivers of conservation that you see, for example, countries like Palau, the Maldives, Honduras. These are countries that have created shark sanctuaries in their waters because they recognize they have more to gain from shark-related tourism than from shark fishing. And we also have seen that in the Bahamas. So there's no question that it can help sustain, for example, humans' commitments to keeping sharks around. I still think more research needs to be done about what's the impact of this shark tourism.
Right.
Basically, look at when you're throwing bloody fish into the water on a regular basis. Does that change shark behavior? Those are some of the questions that scientists have just begun to study, and I think we need a little more research on that.
Can sharks be trained the way we go to SeaWorld and we see Shamu the whale? Can you train a shark to do tricks and things like that?
Sharks can be trained to some extent. We've seen that with actually Jeannie Clark, who's a legendary shark scientist at Mote Marine Lab in Sarasota. She actually did back in the day train sharks to say, for example, hit a target with their nose. But they're certainly much less trainable than a dolphin or any kind of cetacean, and so I don't think you're going to be seeing tons of sharks, in
Right.
SeaWorld in that capacity.
Right, exactly. So not so much entertainment value there.
Right.
Um, what about the issue of humans as predators and the shark fin industry out there? Talk to us about what's going on with that.
Sure, this is a huge driver of shark mortality worldwide. What you have is a rise in consumption of shark fin soup, an Asian delicacy that's particularly popular in China or in other countries where there's a large Chinese population. And there's a huge price that can be fetched if you're talking about purchasing shark fins. And so as a result, science estimate that between 26 million and 73 million sharks a year are targeted just for their fins, and that doesn't include all the sharks that are killed for recreational fishing, accidentally when vessels are going after tuna and swordfish. And so as a result, you've really seen a decimation of certain shark species. And this is one of the real reasons why there's been this push for shark conservation worldwide, because there's a sense that these shark populations are vulnerable because they don't reproduce at the same level as other fish that you might think about, and they also take a long time to mature sexually. So as a result, when you do have targeted fishing of many shark species, it exacts a serious toll.
And what is being done and what should be done?
Well, what's really interesting is you're seeing a push to ban the sale, trade, and possession of shark fins. For example, here in the United States, you've had Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, and California have all banned this, and now you're seeing this move over to the East Coast. You're seeing, for example, Maryland's about to introduce similar legislation. You may see a similar effort in New York or on the federal level. In Florida, just in the past week, they banned the fishing of 4 species of shark, including tiger and 3 species of hammerheads in state waters. And then worldwide, you're seeing a real push for restrictions on shark fishing with mixed results. And so I think there's no question that policymakers, to some extent, are responding to what scientists are telling them, but there's a question of whether they're going to respond quickly enough in order to keep these sharks around.
Well, how do they enforce this? Once the laws are there, how are they enforced?
Well, that's a great question, and it really depends. I mean, I think if you're talking about the shark fin ban, which is just being phased in, that's going to be a question for customs as well as some inspections that need to be done on the state level. In the Bahamas, for example, where they've created a shark fishery, there it's actually going to be the Bahamas government is going to work with the Coast Guard to kind of monitor what's going on, and they're also going to rely on fishermen to report on people who are violating this. So it's a range of measures, but as you really point out, it's one thing to enforce these laws, I mean, to adopt them, but it's another to enforce them, that you really need kind of rigorous enforcement, which is difficult when you're talking about fishing at sea. I mean, this is one of the really tough things. There's a lot of smuggling that goes on, particularly with shark fins that are so easy to kind of dry and enclose in a suitcase and things like that. And so it's something where you're also going to need a shift in cultural and popular attitudes so that people think it's just unacceptable to engage in these kinds of practices in the first place.
When we were children and we were taught about sharks, all we were taught was they're predators, they eat other fish, and if you get near one, it will eat you too.
Right.
So if you were going into a classroom or you could set curriculum, what would you teach the children about sharks so that we do have a proper understanding growing up, and it'll be easy to shape the culture that way?
That's a great question. I would say that really, first and foremost, we just need to have a respect for them. In other words, we need to recognize that they play this role of the sea, that they're not warm and fuzzy like penguins. It's not like you're going to have a pet shark or you need to think that they're super nice to you. That's not the situation. But that there are these incredible creatures that have been around for 400 million years, and they have a place on our planet as well. And I think one of the really interesting things you can talk to school kids about is how they're fascinating innovations that we're finding out right now based on sharks. This idea that we can look at their skin teeth, these denticles, and figure out if there's a way to coat ships so they can move faster through the ocean. Or there are scientists who are looking at how they have electroreception, how they can sense weak vibrations underwater, and we might be able to build a better car battery because we might be able to capitalize on that way that they distribute electric current. So really, it's to recognize that sharks are really different, but they're fascinating in their own right, and that we can learn from them, and there is a way to negotiate a place on the planet for both of us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Juliet. The book is Demon Fish. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara.
Have a great time at the fair.
Thank you.
Bye bye.